Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. We've been doing a lot of talking lately about the 2020 election, obviously, and rightfully so. But today I just want to talk about a growing issue that is still in the Americas, and it's going to probably impact the world economy and mainly South America. And this is the growing economic crisis in Argentina. So we're going to dive into that today, kind of a quick little catching up segment. So, for anyone who is not particularly familiar with the economics and politics of Argentina, Argentina is kind of a boom and bust country in South America. They've seen a lot of ups and downs talking about economics and their economy in general. And they've actually seen, I believe, 22 recessions in the last couple decades alone. And so this current problem is actually nothing really particularly new, but it's been made worse because of political division, the pandemic, and just politics in all of South America that have kind of rubbed off in that region. So this has just kind of led to low faith in the government, large protest movements, and even talks of a separatist movement, So it's kind of serious stuff. And I think the best way to start would be to kind of give you guys a background on why the issue seems to reoccur in the first place. And so to begin, I think it's important just to remember that for this entire episode, that the issue is Argentina has self-induced these problems and the IMF is culpable. So these two have kind of worked together to kind of recreate these cycles in Argentina of recession, boom, recession, boom. And so I just want to put a spotlight on why this is happening. So I think this is pretty obvious for a lot of economists, but it's definitely worth mentioning. So what I keep seeing is that when Argentina's economy grows during a time of growth and prosperity, as long as commodity prices aren't too high, imports inside of the country rise faster than exports, right? And this is data from Foreign Policy magazine and the IMF that have said this. And so it seems obvious to me, but basically when imports rise faster than exports, Argentina then runs out of dollars. And it's important to note that they use dollars, but they also use the Argentinian peso as a transactional currency. And so, yeah, when Argentina runs out of dollars, this causes inflation caused by the depreciation of the Argentinian peso, and then borrowing dries up. And this seems to happen probably once every decade, or a couple times every decade. And then obviously poverty soars and the government overspends to calm social chaos, and this cycle just repeats again. And now the crazy thing is that next, Argentina does always ask the IMF for bailouts. And yeah, this is, according to Foreign Policy, happened 22 times in their history. So I feel like if you keep doing the same thing and you get the same results, maybe something's wrong. But the IMF and Argentina seem to be kind of stuck in this, I guess we could call it a relationship, I don't know. And so the problem is that the peso inside of Argentina, like I mentioned, is a transactional currency. And most normal people don't save in pesos, because at any point it could be worthless. And just to clarify, and this is just on Wikipedia, just a very simple definition for people, is that a transactional currency is currency from where the transaction originated, right? If it's different than the base currency. So for example, if a British firm is buying goods from America and they receive an invoice in US dollars, the transactional currency would be US dollars and the base currency would be the British pound. And so it's kind of the intermediary currency, to say the least. So now, common sense should tell me that the IMF should know that the country's central bank lacks dollars and that they can only postpone or push off the problem. But again, in 2018, the same thing has happened again. The IMF stepped in again. But now, in the face of obviously the coronavirus pandemic, their economy is expected to contract by 12% by the end of 2020, And Buenos Aires, again, is asking the IMF to defer its payments on a $44 billion loan for at least 3 years. So it's not looking too rosy for them. Now, interestingly enough, there's some interesting stuff going on with this current crisis. I'm obviously not an expert on Argentina, but I'm just trying to relay to you guys what I'm seeing here. But Argentina actually imposed this recent crisis and program directly on the IMF, according to reports from The Economist and Foreign Policy again. The shocking thing is that it may have been due to dealings with Donald Trump. That is interesting. So Foreign Policy reports that there were transactions between Donald Trump and the ex-Argentinian president Mauricio Macri, who is also a conservative, but very different conservative than Trump. He's more of a neoliberal type of conservative. And so Macri and Trump had actually done real estate business together over the years, and Macri had Trump's ear. And he used it to persuade Trump to convince the IMF to shower Argentina with IMF dollars. And I think what was happening here was that Macri was hoping that this would give him a re-election. And it would prevent Argentina from sliding into the rhetoric of a Venezuela communist, socialist, chaotic nation. And so I think Trump went along with this because it aligned with his if I win, we're going to stop socialism approach to a lot of things he does. And so then Trump and him basically cajoled the IMF into giving $57 billion to Argentina. And this seemed really problematic because Macri was not reelected. So Macri lost the upcoming election, and he lost it to kind of a populist nationalist party, which is the Peronist Party, and they're run by President Alberto Fernandez. And I would call him something short of a nationalist. I'm not a super expert on Argentina's specifics in their politics, but I think we'd call him a populist or a nationalist. And he was handed a very poor economy, obviously, and creditors were bracing for another national default. So now this takes us to the current moment. And sorry, that was definitely a lot of background, but it's interesting to understand that Argentina kind of keeps putting themselves into this spot, and the IMF's kind of letting them do it. And it obviously doesn't help when you have multinational corporations or multinational, real estate people like Trump that kind of have their foot in the door. And so since 2018, things are looking quite bleak. 40% of the population is under the poverty line, according to Reuters, and multinational corporations are leaving the country in droves. According to Reuters again, just a few days ago at the time of this recording, Walmart Inc. said it was selling its retail operations in Argentina to a South American supermarket chain owner, Grupo de Narvaez, and pulling back to the country's, just kind of more simple institutions at this time. And so also a troubling line comes from Guido Lorenzo, who's an economist at a consultancy group out of Argentina. And he said that, in quotes, in Argentina, you see a phenomenon of firms divesting and companies changing hands. This reflects a bad lack of confidence in the direction of the country. And that's really worrying. And so now I think it's no surprise to anyone that between, a change in political parties, declining economy, a pandemic, there is inevitable political chaos and declining faith in Argentina's political institutions going on right now. To me, it sounds like no one is happy inside of Argentina. Working people in Buenos Aires have taken to the streets over the crisis and the COVID lockdowns. Also, people in the agricultural interior are also unhappy. They voted for Macri, who was the conservative incumbent who lost, and they highly dislike this populist movement that is not really handling the economy too well either. And from what I can see, the lockdowns only hurt the economy too and did not halt the spread of COVID-19. The Economist has done a great job covering the crisis, and they said that Argentina has one of the harshest lockdowns in South America, but such measures have not suppressed the disease. On October 19th, Argentina recorded its millionth case. Also, The Economist says that it's among the 10 countries with the highest cumulative caseloads, and the lockdown has weighed heavily on the economy. So like I said earlier, the IMF expects it to be contracted by up to 12% compared to only 8% for most of South America. And this is talking about the economy again. So Argentina has more COVID cases than a lot of other South American countries, and their economy is doing worse off. That's a bad combination right now. And so, to me, it's definitely understandable that people are not happy with the government enforcing these lockdowns, especially when the country's not really handling COVID that well, and B, the economy's in the tank. So the problem is now that the IMF and the former Macri government seem more responsible than anyone. But the current president, Fernandez, hasn't helped. Enforcing draconian lockdowns doesn't really seem to fix it at all, especially when you don't really have a buffer zone. Some countries that seem to have done well, it wasn't just the lockdowns, it was a multitude of effects. And Argentina seems to just think draconian measures equals success. I don't know. But the other worrying trend, and it's kind of the part that actually drew me into this issue and talking about it tonight, is that there are other worrying trends in political chaos that are stemming from this recession and kind of the political urban-rural divide, which we're seeing in a lot of Western countries. So the wine-growing region, which is known Mendoza, now requires visitors to present national and provincial government permits just to enter. And this was enforced by the Peronist government and President Fernandez out of Buenos Aires. And so now talks have just worsened to the point where there's actually a separatist movement growing in these rural wine-growing areas. Because people are sick of Buenos Aires telling them what to do. I mean, to me, it is pretty ridiculous that there's actually, you need a permit to travel inside of your own country. And I could understand the anger there. So there's separatist sentiment, and it actually has a spokesman now in some of these rural areas. His name is Alfredo Cornejo, and he's a former governor who is now a congressman, and he leads the opposition Radical Party. And in June, he called it Mendo Exit. Mendoza, also along with Cordoba and Santa Fe, could actually be an economic boom zone because let's see, it looks like they account for a fifth of Argentina's GDP, according to The Economist. So if these rural wine regions and other rural regions were to separate from Buenos Aires, they would take about 20% of the nation's economy with them. Now, obviously, it's more complicated than that, but it's not good. And I don't really see there actually being a separation or an independence movement, but the fact that these talks are happening is not a good call. And also, there does seem to be growing political division, like a lot of countries. According to a recent opinion poll conducted by Real Diatore, 65% of people in Cordoba and 54% in Santa Fe believe that the national government discriminates against them because they oppose the Peronist government. And in Cordoba, 40% of respondents said that they favored secession, which is a stunning finding, according to the pollster who did this. And this is all coming from The Economist and their local polls that they use with other organizations in the region. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a good situation. You have a separatist movement, people on the streets, even in Buenos Aires, that are angry. You have a recession. You have COVID ravaging the country. It's just not a good combination, and I'm worried that it's going to get worse before it gets better. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I'm going to leave it there. But the situation will definitely take some tough remedies from the government. What I've gathered from my studies, just like researching for this catching up, is that Argentina needs to be more open for competition. They seem to be really limiting business and capital. And Foreign Policy magazine, I'm just going to leave it with this, says that this cannot be fixed quickly. It needs active policies to support startups. It needs the formation of human capital. And above all, it needs to reduce the tax burden on those that work in the dwindling private sector. And I said that correctly, dwindling private sector. I think it's, only about 8 million of Argentina's 45 million population work in the private sector, while public sector pensioners add up to more than 20 million. So it's interesting that close to half of Argentina's population is now in the public sector. And I don't think that's always good. So I think they have a lot of soul searching to do. I'm going to leave it with that. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye.